A wounded veteran returns home from Afghanistan, seeking quiet redemption on a small farm that everyone else had long abandoned. The townsfolk laughed, calling his land worthless, just another forgotten patch of rural America. But when he discovers an ancient artifact buried beneath the soil, it ignites a national frenzy, with powerful museums and shadowy collectors descending like vultures, each determined to stake their claim. Now the soldier who once stood strong against enemy fire faces a battle he never expected, protecting his property, preserving sacred history, and uniting a divided community before greed tears it apart. If you want to experience an incredible story of courage, integrity, and standing up for what's right, you won't want to miss a single second. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and join the thousands who've made this their favorite place for inspiring American stories. Lucas Doyle paused at the edge of the neglected farmland, the morning sun casting long shadows over fields choked with thistles and wild grass. At 47, his lean frame and upright posture still bore traces of the Army Staff Sergeant he had once been, though his left leg ached where a piece of shrapnel had torn into it years ago in Afghanistan. Now he stood gazing across the 40 acres he had just purchased in Maplewick, a small rural town in western Pennsylvania. The locals thought he was either a fool or a dreamer, or both, for investing in what they called the Caldwell Place land that had supposedly proven barren for decades. A shabby two-story farmhouse half hidden behind an overgrown hedgerow looked ready to buckle in the next strong gust of wind. Beside it, a barn that leaned at an unsettling angle threatened to collapse at the slightest provocation. Yet for Lucas, this rundown property was more than just a real estate gamble. It was supposed to be a refuge from a world he found increasingly noisy, a place where he could build something of his own. After 2 decades of military service, word traveled quickly in Maplewick. On his first day in town, Lucas had driven his old truck to Baxter's Hardware for basic supplies. Ronald Baxter, the store's gruff owner, saw the new face and all, but chuckled when Lucas mentioned his plans to revive the Caldwell Place. "Well, I'll sell you these tools," Baxter had said in a tone dripping with skepticism, "but I reckon you might be back to return 'em once you realize what you're up against." Lucas offered no retort, letting the man's words slide off him. He had learned long ago that meeting dismissive comments with silence often unsettled the speaker, far more than any argument could. With measured calm, he paid for his things and left the store, ignoring the pitying, curious stares. The quiet farmland reminded Lucas of nights on base in Afghanistan, when in rare moments of peace, he would look out at the desert's vast emptiness and see possibilities hidden within the silence. Now that sense of promise swelled again, despite the seemingly endless tasks that awaited him. The porch steps of the farmhouse were so rotten, he nearly fell through them as he approached. Inside, dust and spiderwebs draped every corner, as though nature had been gradually reclaiming the space for its own. Warped floorboards groaned under his boots, and the sagging roof let in beams of early light, spotlighting the heavy dust motes in the stale air. Lucas was no stranger to challenge. From a hardscrabble upbringing in rural Ohio to his 22 years of service in the Army, he had learned to keep moving forward. His savings accumulated over deployments, and a few security consulting gigs after retiring had gone almost entirely into acquiring the Caldwell Place. The property needed a new roof, new wiring, reinforced beams, and 100 other repairs. Yet Lucas believed wholeheartedly that dedication and elbow grease could coax new life from these battered bones. More than that, he was determined to prove to himself that he could shepherd something from ruin to fruition without the constraints of military orders or government bureaucracy dictating his every move. He didn't have illusions of grandeur. He didn't imagine turning the farm into a massive commercial enterprise. Nor did he expect that Maplewick's residents would welcome him with open arms right away. What Lucas wanted was simpler: a piece of land to call his own, a roof he had fixed with his own hands, and a sense of purpose that steadied him after years of adrenaline-fueled deployments. Even if this place never became a model of agricultural success, he would be content knowing he had tried. And so, with the first rays of sunlight climbing higher, Lucas set down his duffel bag, squared his shoulders, and prepared to do what he did best: work toward a goal, one methodical step at a time. A full day of labor quickly taught Lucas just how much had to be done before the farmhouse could be considered livable. He prioritized tasks with military precision. First came clearing debris and old insulation that had turned the attic into a haven for mice and squirrels. Next, he would tackle the mold-splotched walls on the ground floor. The list went on: a roof check, foundational reinforcement, and the unearthing of a likely defunct septic tank. He found a kind of solace in the work, the repetitive motions of hammering, sawing, and hauling refuse quieting his mind in a way that reminded him of field exercises that demanded rigorous focus. After hours of exertion, he took a break in the early afternoon, sitting on a battered old chair he had dragged onto the porch. From there, he had a clear view of the farmland rolling into the distance. The grass had grown waist-high in some places, and clusters of invasive weeds turned the fields into a patchwork of tangled green. The sloping hills and the border of dense trees at the far edge of the property suggested that decades ago, someone might have carefully planned to cultivate a variety of crops or maintain a small orchard. But that was long before the Caldwell family abandoned the place. According to local rumor, the property had once been fairly prosperous in the 1960s and 1970s, growing corn and occasionally wheat until a string of misfortunes or poor land management rendered it unprofitable. Now, most people in Maplewick dismissed it as a dead piece of ground. His solitude ended when a dusty pickup truck rattled into the driveway. Out stepped Grace Campbell, the town librarian who had been among the rare few to greet Lucas warmly. He had visited the Maplewick Public Library to research local soil conditions and see if there were any historical records about the Caldwell farm. Grace, a woman in her early 50s with warm eyes and a ready smile, had helped him navigate the scanned archives. Today she'd come bearing a thermos of coffee and a basket of sandwiches. "Figured you might use some lunch," she called, making her way up the porch. Lucas stood with the same quiet courtesy he'd shown when she first offered to help at the library. He was still adjusting to civility, to gestures of kindness, after years of operating under the mentality that trust had to be earned painfully. "Thank you," he said, accepting the thermos. "I didn't realize librarians made house calls." Grace gave a quick laugh, setting the basket on a makeshift table made from an overturned crate. "I'm not sure what your old commanding officers would say, but around here we believe in helping someone who's shown the determination to do the impossible, like fix up the Caldwell place." They ate in companionable silence for a moment. Lucas found himself glancing at her with gratitude. Most Maplewick locals had barely disguised their scorn or curiosity. In contrast, Grace seemed genuinely interested in his progress. Between bites of a surprisingly fresh turkey sandwich, he asked, "What do you know about this farm's history?" "All I've heard is that it's cursed land that can't grow more than a handful of weeds. Depends on who you ask," Grace replied, wiping her hands on a napkin. "Some folks claim it was always rocky and poorly drained. Others say that the Caldwells were dealing with issues that went beyond farming. Economic troubles, personal disputes. There's a bunch of stories, but no hard facts. The library's records show that a previous generation did all right here, though. One old county agricultural report claimed they even experimented with heirloom varieties of corn. So who knows? Maybe with the right approach, you'll surprise everyone." After Grace left, Lucas turned his attention to a fresh curiosity, a battered folder of documents she had given him. It contained old newspaper clippings and agricultural notes referencing the Caldwell land. One page, yellowed from age, showed a rough sketch of the farm's boundaries, with notes scribbled in the margins about soil, pH rainfall averages, and a cryptic mention of cultural significance on the northwest corner. The phrase struck him as odd. He'd only been focused on the farm's practical challenges and had paid no special attention to the weedy thicket in that distant section. Curiosity gnawed at him. Packing a small bag with water, a map, and some basic tools, Lucas trekked across the overgrown fields toward the northwest corner. As he walked, the day's heat rose, pressing down on him. Grasshoppers leapt out of his path. He heard the distant hum of insects and the occasional caw of a crow. Maplewick's main road was nearly half a mile away, leaving the farmland hushed and secluded. If nothing else, he thought the quiet was a balm to his mind. The terrain shifted as he approached the corner. A few saplings and some older trees clustered there, as if nature was reclaiming that patch faster than the rest. Brambles tangled around fallen logs, forcing him to use a machete to clear a path. Eventually, he reached a clearing under a massive oak. Its trunk was thicker than any he had seen on the property, suggesting it had been growing there for centuries. Beneath it, partly concealed by decades of decaying leaves, Lucas noticed a grouping of stones arranged in a circle. At first, he wondered if they were just random rocks laid down by bored teenagers. But upon closer inspection, he realized they were too deliberately placed to be random. Kneeling down, Lucas brushed away layers of leaf litter. In the center of the circle sat a flat stone etched with faint symbols, markings he didn't recognize. He'd traveled extensively in the Middle East and parts of Asia during his army years, so he'd become somewhat attuned to the look of ancient carvings. Something about these lines and shapes suggested genuine age. As he worked, he dislodged a small metal object, greenish with patina, buried at the circle's edge. Lifting it carefully, he found it was a medallion of some sort with intricate designs that might have been religious or ceremonial. The center of the medallion held a tiny stone that caught the sunlight in a dazzling way. He frowned, wondering how such a relic ended up here on land that locals called worthless, alarmed by the potential significance of his find. Lucas took out his phone and snapped photos. Adrenaline coursed through him, a sensation oddly familiar, like discovering a hidden weapons cache in a remote village overseas. He knew better than to tamper with the medallion or the site any further. If this was historically or culturally valuable, the right experts needed to see it. The question was, whom to trust, the library, the county officials, maybe the local historical society. He recalled Grace's mention of a friend who was an archaeology professor. That seemed like the safest route until he knew more. The rest of Maplewood didn't need to be aware. He'd stumbled upon something potentially profound right beneath their noses. Over the next few days, Lucas weighed his options. He wanted to do right by whatever lay beneath the soil on his farm. As a veteran, he understood codes of conduct, how crucial it was to respect local customs and artifacts in foreign lands. It didn't escape him that Maplewick's farmland was someone else's ancestral ground. Even if he had paid good money for the deed, he decided to reach out to Grace, who in turn arranged a meeting with Dr. Veronica Morales, a professor of archaeology at a nearby university in Pittsburgh. Grace spoke highly of Dr. Morales, describing her as someone who cared more about preserving history than chasing personal accolades. They settled on a quiet afternoon meeting at the farmhouse, intentionally avoiding local chatter. Grace arrived first, bringing fresh coffee and a determined look. Lucas sensed that she recognized the weight of this discovery, though neither of them spoke of it publicly. When Dr. Morales finally pulled up in a small sedan, Lucas could tell she was already intrigued. A slender woman in her late 40s, she carried an air of calm confidence and spoke with the directness of someone who had spent years on digs around the globe. After introductions, she didn't waste time on pleasantries. Grace tells me, "You found a carved stone circle and a possible artifact." Lucas led her to his truck where the medallion lay in a padded container. Dr. Morales donned gloves, carefully lifting the object as if it were a fragile relic in an excavation. Her eyebrows rose, her expression shifting from professional detachment to genuine astonishment. "This patina, these markings," she murmured. "It's older than most colonial-era finds in Pennsylvania, possibly much older." He noticed Grace watching closely, a spark of excitement lighting her eyes. Dr. Morales continued in a more measured tone, "I'll need more analysis, but this definitely predates modern settlement. The question is, does it connect to local indigenous tribes or something else entirely?" "You said there's a stone circle." "Yes," Lucas confirmed. "The circle is at the northwest corner of the property under a huge oak. I didn't tamper with it beyond clearing some debris. I've seen a bit of the world enough to know to leave artifacts in place until someone qualified can examine them." "Smart approach," Dr. Morales said approvingly. "A lot of folks get excited and start digging, which destroys the site context. That context can tell us far more than the artifact by itself." She studied Lucas for a moment, perhaps weighing his intentions. "Would you be willing to let me take a look at the circle?" she asked. "Ideally, it should be documented thoroughly before deciding on any next steps." Lucas nodded. "Absolutely, but I want to keep this quiet. I'm already facing skepticism from the locals, and I don't want a bunch of treasure hunters descending on my farm if word gets out." Dr. Morales exchanged a glance with Grace. "I understand completely," she said. "Discretion is crucial at this stage. We'll keep it low profile until we know more." That late afternoon, Lucas led Dr. Morales and Grace through the tangled brush toward the oak tree in the northwest corner. The air was oppressively humid, and insects buzzed in clouds beneath the canopy. Dr. Morales moved with practiced care, pausing to note how the land sloped where stones jutted from the ground, and the distribution of vegetation that might suggest earlier human intervention. When they reached the stone circle, she knelt and began a meticulous examination. Grace stood beside Lucas, occasionally fanning her face. "You weren't kidding about this place being overgrown," she said with a half-smile. "I feel like I'm on a mini expedition." Lucas nodded, gaze fixed on Dr. Morales. He watched her snap photographs and make quick sketches in a small notebook. The professor's intense focus reminded him of the intelligence officers he had worked with in the Army, scanning every detail for potential meaning. Finally, she stood brushing dirt from her khaki pants. "This is definitely significant. These stones aren't just random. They appear intentionally placed, possibly for ceremonial purposes. The carvings, though, faint hint at some kind of symbolic language I don't immediately recognize. And that medallion might connect to this site in ways we can't see yet. She looked up, meeting Lucas's eyes. If you choose to move forward, I'd suggest a formal but discreet archaeological survey. We'll bring in a small team. I trust gather data and proceed under confidentiality agreements. No press, no big announcements, just thorough science. Lucas exhaled in relief. That's more or less what I was hoping to hear. I don't want to be railroaded by big institutions who might swoop in and claim the land or the artifact. I'm not looking to profit, but I do want to protect what's here. De Morales gave a small nod of approval. We'll do our best to honor that. For now, let's keep the artifact locked up securely. Handle it as little as possible. Proper chain of custody is essential if this proves to be an item of major historical import. After they trekked back to the farmhouse, Grace excused herself, reminding Lucas to drop by the library if he needed anything else. After Morales lingered, she removed her gloves and stowed her notes carefully. I'll make some phone calls tonight, see who might be suitable for a preliminary field survey without raising alarms. In my experience, the moment certain people catch wind of anything that could be priceless, they descend like hawks. You have the advantage of living in a relatively obscure place, which might buy us some time. Lucas nodded. Time is exactly what I need to fix this place up, to figure out the farmland, and to handle whatever's buried in that corner of the property. I'm grateful you're willing to help. She offered a faint smile. Think of it as a partnership. Whatever's hidden out there, it's a piece of everyone's past. We just have to unearth it responsibly. Over the next few days, the quiet Lucas Doyle cherished began to slip away as word of his unusual find seeped through the cracks of Maplewick's tight-knit gossip channels. Despite Lucas's and Dr. Veronica Morales's best efforts to keep the discovery discreet, curious whispers sprouted at Baxter's Hardware and the Corner Spoon Cafe. A few neighbors who'd previously shown only polite indifference began driving by the Caldwell place at a crawl, craning their necks to see if there was some spectacular excavation in progress. Meanwhile, Dr. Morales organized a small team of trusted colleagues, a metallurgist named Dr. Clark, and an anthropology grad student, Mina Coalfield, to conduct a preliminary site survey. They arrived on a cloudy morning in a battered university van, each sporting an excited yet cautious demeanor. Lucas had spent that morning clearing out the last of the rotted floorboards from the second story of the farmhouse. Without a second thought, he left the chaotic interior to greet the newcomers. After introductions, Dr. Morales explained the plan. In crisp clinical detail, they would start with non-invasive methods like ground-penetrating radar near the oak tree and around the stone circle, supplemented by meticulous photography and soil samples. Actual digging, she emphasized, might not happen for weeks, if not months, pending permits and a cohesive research strategy that respected any indigenous claims to the site. To maintain secrecy, they parked the van close to the barn, away from the view of the main road. The farmland's tall grasses and rolling contours also helped conceal their movements. Together, the group carefully trekked to the northwest corner, where the air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The massive oak loomed overhead, its branches like ancient guardians over the circle of stones below. Dr. Clark and Mina began setting up scanning equipment, while Dr. Morales circled the site, taking notes on everything from the arrangement of the rocks to the diameter of the clearing. Lucas watched them work with a mixture of relief and trepidation. He felt relieved that actual professionals were now handling what he suspected was a major discovery, but the knot in his stomach hinted at worry. Old habits from his Army days told him to expect complications whenever a situation involved layered interests, historical, cultural, or otherwise. On missions abroad, he'd learned that artifacts carried not only archaeological value but also symbolic power, sometimes prompting conflicts among local groups and foreign institutions. Grace Campbell showed up later that afternoon bringing sandwiches and iced tea. She was as fascinated as anyone else, carefully peeking at the radar machinery and the computer readouts. Dr. Morales explained the basics of the technology with a mixture of scientific passion and caution. We're not looking for treasure, the archaeologist said pointedly. What we hope to find are clues, post holes, buried structures, or other features that tell us about how people once lived here. Whether that life was 500 years ago or 2,000 years ago, we won't know until we analyze the data. Lucas felt a ripple of curiosity at the notion that ancient people might have conducted rituals or gatherings exactly where he planned to grow his future crops. The revelation humbled him. While Maplewick's residents might see the Caldwell land as worthless something beneath its surface had once drawn human attention for reasons far greater than any modern skepticism. And Lucas, more than anyone, wanted to handle that legacy correctly. Despite their best attempts to stay under the radar, the presence of outsiders poking around in the fields was too conspicuous to evade Maplewick as rumor mill for long. By the second week of the survey, a trickle of onlookers had become an intermittent stream of vehicles idling on the nearby road. One late afternoon, Lucas spotted a sleek SUV parked just outside his property line. A man in an expensive-looking suit stood beside it, talking on a cell phone and occasionally peering through a pair of binoculars as if searching for evidence of hidden riches. That same evening, Dr. Morales pulled Lucas aside, looking troubled. "I've been getting calls," she admitted. "Not from our university board, but from other institutions, museums, private collectors. It seems someone tipped them off that we're investigating a pre-colonial site with potentially high-value artifacts." Her lips tightened into a grim line. "They're demanding to know what we've found. Worse, I've heard whispers about big money offers to buy out private owners. If the artifacts are what they suspect, Lucas didn't need to ask which private owner might be the target of these buyouts." He exhaled slowly, feeling the tension coil in his chest. "I haven't told anyone about the medallion except for you, Grace, and the rest of your team. But rumors spread fast. Maybe someone saw your equipment and put two and two together." "Exactly," Dr. Morales said. "And once the idea of treasure enters the conversation, it's nearly impossible to keep the discourse civilized. That's when you get profiteers and unscrupulous types crawling out of the woodwork." A few days later, her predictions proved correct. Lucas was patching up a section of the farmhouse roof when he heard the crunch of gravel under tires. He climbed down the ladder in time to see a tall, bespectacled man step out of another luxury SUV. The stranger introduced himself as Thomas Winfield, representing the North Atlantic Cultural Foundation. Winfield spoke in smooth, rehearsed tones, commending Lucas on his historic find and suggesting they discuss an exclusive arrangement. According to Winfield, his foundation had resources that could ensure the artifact's protection and display in a world-class museum, a courtesy he implied that came with substantial financial compensation. Lucas listened politely, arms crossed, mind racing with a familiar mix of caution and indignation. Memories returned of warlords offering him bribes in exchange for special treatment during overseas deployments. Winfield's approach felt unsettlingly similar. Dangle. Money appealed to vanity, assume compliance. Lucas politely refused to discuss the site in detail and told Winfield he was trespassing on private property. "If you're truly interested in preservation," Lucas said, "you can contact Dr. Morales at the university. Right now you're on land. I haven't given you permission to be on." Winfield's smile wavered just enough to betray his annoyance. He handed Lucas a business card, then left in a swirl of dust and pretended amicability. Lucas tucked the card away, certain he wouldn't be calling, but equally certain that this was only the beginning of a wave of outside pressures. Their small, quiet dig had become the subject of speculation, and the million-dollar artifact rumor was taking root despite no such figure being confirmed or even mentioned. Tensions flared further when a local newspaper, the Maplewick Gazette, printed a front-page story headlined, "Secret Dig on Caldwell Farm Is There Treasure Underfoot." While the article offered no concrete details, it carried enough innuendo to stoke public imagination. Almost overnight, the Caldwell place turned into the local spectacle, with townspeople half-jokingly calling Lucas a future millionaire. Others muttered that he must have known about the artifact all along, suggesting he'd schemed to buy the farm cheap to reap untold profits later. In response, Dr. Morales called an impromptu meeting in Lucas's partly refurbished living room. Grace was there, as well as Dr. Clark Mina, and even a representative from the County Historical Society, a soft-spoken woman named Irene Gustafson, who specialized in local archives. With a stack of old documents spread across a makeshift table, Irene confirmed that there had been whispered legends about an old sacred site in Maplewick's outskirts, though records were fragmentary. One set of diaries from the 1800s indicated a family who farmed the land had made a pact with local indigenous people to keep a certain portion undisturbed. "That might explain the circle," Irene mused, tapping the worn pages. "If it was recognized as sacred or historically important, any new owners might have been urged or even bound by personal promise to leave it alone." Dr. Morales looked at Lucas. "This only heightens the need to handle this responsibly. If local tribes have a historical claim, they should be consulted. But that's a delicate process and we can't rush it. Meanwhile, it might help if we offered a careful public statement to calm the speculation. Something that emphasizes the historical value over sensational treasure hunting fantasies, Lucas agreed. The last thing he wanted was a rowdy crowd tearing up his property in search of fabled riches. Though he felt a pang of worry about drawing attention, he recognized that silence was no longer working. The rumor mill was too active, and opportunists were already sniffing around. If anything, a modest press release might help preserve the integrity of the site. The group drafted a cautious statement. Yes, there was an ongoing archaeological survey on private land, done with the landowner's permission. No, it wasn't a hunt for treasure, but a legitimate historical investigation under professional supervision. Irene promised to bring the statement to her contacts at the local newspaper, urging them to publish something more factual in the next issue. Yet even as they finalized their draft, Grace caught sight of a car pulling up. "I think we have company," she said, peering through a dusty window. Sure enough, a news van from a Pittsburgh TV station came rattling into the driveway, camera already rolling. Lucas felt his gut tighten. The camera crew was certainly not there to celebrate his home renovations. They wanted a scoop, the kind that might involve ancient artifacts and small-town secrets. "Stay calm," Dr. Morales whispered, as though they were about to head into a delicate diplomatic situation. She wasn't wrong. In Lucas's mind, this felt eerily similar to the negotiation standoffs he'd navigated overseas, only this time the battlefield was his front yard, and the weapon was public perception. Within minutes, the TV crew was on the porch. A perky reporter in a bright blazer at the forefront, microphone in hand. "Mr. Doyle, we understand you have discovered something quite valuable on your property," she said, flashing a practiced smile. "Could you tell our viewers exactly what's been found?" Her tone suggested she was fishing for dramatic headlines, not nuanced history. Behind her, a cameraman panned the lens across the unassuming farmhouse in the fields beyond, as if expecting a gleaming treasure chest to appear at any moment. Lucas, forcing a polite neutrality, stepped forward. He introduced Dr. Morales, explaining her role as an archaeological expert. The reporter tried redirecting every answer towards sensational angles, asking about rumored high bids from museums, or whether locals were claiming they'd seen him hauling sacks of gold coins from the property. Finally, Dr. Morales calmly corrected the record. "We are conducting a scholarly investigation of a site that may have historical significance. There is no evidence of gold or a treasure trove. What we have is a medallion that appears to be an artifact of pre-colonial origin in a stone circle that needs careful analysis." The reporter's face fell slightly, the glint of sensationalism in her eyes dimming. "Well, that's not nearly as exciting as the rumors," she remarked, though she kept smiling at the camera. She then tried to prod Lucas about how much the artifact might fetch if sold to a private collector. Lucas felt his patience fray. Channeling the disciplined calm he had mastered in the army, he responded, "I'm not interested in selling anything. This belongs to history, not a private sale." He glanced at Dr. Morales, who gave him an approving nod, though the TV segment was likely to be short-lived and full of editing bias. Lucas hoped at least some viewers would take away the truth. After the crew finally left, the tension on the porch lingered like a bad smell. Irene from the Historical Society tried to sound optimistic. "At least we set the record straight. Maybe fewer people will assume you're about to get rich." "Quick," Grace snorted. "You don't know the media. They might spin it any way they please. But I'm with you in hoping reason prevails." Reason, however, seemed in short supply. Over the next week, several more cameras and journalists popped up unannounced, and a handful of would-be treasure hunters actually tried to sneak onto the land at night. Lucas took to patrolling the perimeter before bed, flashlight in hand, mindful of the clumps of wild brush that provided easy cover. His military training alerted him to subtle disturbances: a trampled patch of grass, footprints near the barn. Once he even startled a pair of teenagers who had hopped the fence, perhaps on a dare, or seeking a viral social media post. At Dr. Morales' urging, Lucas eventually filed a formal complaint with the county sheriffs about trespassers. Maplewick's sheriff, a man named Danny Caro, arrived one afternoon looking slightly overwhelmed. In a town more accustomed to small-time mischief or an occasional bar fight, archaeological sites and rumored fortunes were uncharted territory. Caro promised to drive by more often, though he admitted his department had limited manpower. "Wish people would realize that if there's truly an important discovery, we need to do this by the book," he said in a resigned tone. Lucas felt a pang of gratitude toward Dr. Morales, Grace, and Irene for helping him navigate these complexities. His dream of quiet farm life was rapidly evolving into a balancing act between ethical stewardship and public spectacle. The conflict ahead was becoming clearer with each passing day. Large institutions would inevitably arrive with legal teams, money and influence, vying for control over the narrative and the artifacts. All the while, local folks might resent an out-of-towner overshadowing their community. It was in essence a situation that demanded not just practicality, but also diplomacy, something Lucas had hoped to leave behind when he hung up his uniform. Amid mounting pressures, Dr. Morales brought in a crucial ally, Professor Irene Yazzie, a scholar specializing in indigenous history and cultural preservation. Professor Yazzie was of Hopi descent and had spent much of her academic life advocating for Native American sites to be studied with direct tribal input. She drove out from Pittsburgh one crisp morning to see the farm firsthand, wearing hiking boots and carrying a notebook adorned with tribal motifs. Lucas greeted her with genuine relief. The moment they shook hands, he sensed her sincerity, a measured kindness in her dark eyes. De Morales briefed me about what you've found, Yazzie said, carefully choosing her words. But I'd like to see the circle myself. Sometimes the land speaks more clearly than our notes and photographs. When Lucas led her to the northwest corner, he noticed a shift in her demeanor. She grew quiet, letting her gaze roam across the ring of stones, the towering oak, and the rustle of leaves that created a subtle natural choir. She knelt by the largest rock, running her hand lightly over the carvings as though paying respects. Rising slowly, she turned to Lucas and said, "If this site is indeed connected to an ancestral tradition, we owe it the dignity of proper consultation. Which tribes lived here historically? Did they leave oral histories that mention ceremonial grounds in this region? These are questions we should answer together." Lucas inhaled, feeling a mixture of hope and apprehension. His main worry was that major institutions would barrel in, overshadowing local voices and ignoring the input of those whose heritage might be intimately tied to these stones. Professor Yazzie, however, seemed genuinely committed to the opposite approach. "I'll reach out to a few tribal councils with known connections to the Pennsylvania region," she said. "We'll proceed cautiously and with respect. No excavations that could destroy burial sites or artifacts without a cultural representative's guidance." That day ended with a small but meaningful gathering at Lucas's farmhouse. Dr. Morales, Professor Yazzie Grace Irene from the Historical Society, and even Sheriff Caro stopped by him. They crowded into the living room, forming a de facto council of stakeholders. Sitting around a folding table, they hashed out next steps, contacting local indigenous groups, securing the site from further trespassing, and drafting a more comprehensive statement to the media about the ethical frameworks guiding the research. Lucas was struck by the sense of unity, despite each person's distinct background. It was as though this discovery forced them to look past their differences and work toward a shared goal. Near the end of the meeting, Professor Yazzie turned to Lucas. "You're the landowner and in many ways the custodian of this site. Your decisions will guide how this is preserved or exploited. Are you prepared for the burden that might bring?" Lucas thought of the orchard he hoped to plant and the sense of peace he had once pictured for his future here. Then he envisioned the swirl of cameras, the phone calls from distant museums, and the faint but steady footsteps of those who might come to stake their claims. "I don't know if anyone can truly be prepared," he replied quietly, "but I'll do whatever it takes to make sure this place and its history are treated with the respect they deserve." As he said the words, the others in the room nodded silently, acknowledging the gravity of his commitment. He might not have medals pinned to his chest anymore, but this felt like a new mission, one involving heritage integrity and a battle for stewardship rather than territory. And in Maplewick, a place that still felt both strange and oddly welcoming, Lucas discovered he was not alone in this fight. 2 months of steady work brought both progress and new tension to Lucas Doyle's quiet corner of Maplewick. On the farm side of things, Lucas found a welcome reprieve in routine labor mornings spent mending the barn's sagging framework, afternoons repairing windows and installing new insulation in the farmhouse. When his leg twinged, he recalled worse pain endured overseas and kept going, buoyed by the desire to transform the Caldwell land into a place of renewal. Yet the archaeological side of his life revealed a different sort of battlefront. Professor Irene Yazzie's attempts to involve local indigenous groups bore fruit, but the complexities multiplied. A small delegation from the Lenape Nation visited. As oral histories suggested, Lenape communities had once lived in these parts. They arrived with an air of solemn curiosity, accompanied by an elder who introduced himself simply as Richard. He carried himself with quiet dignity And though Lucas was initially unsure how to greet the visitors, he noticed how Richard's gaze lingered on the stone circle beneath the ancient oak. Together, Professor Yazzie, Veronica Morales, and the Lenape representatives walked the perimeter of the ceremonial site. Richard said little except to note that certain symbols on the largest carved stone resembled markings he'd seen in artifacts from older tribal archives. While not conclusive proof of direct Lenape origin, it hinted that tribal ancestors or neighboring peoples had once used the circle for important rituals. For Lucas, the realization was humbling. The land he had purchased in search of personal peace held significance for entire communities whose heritage stretched back centuries or more. The visit concluded with a respectful discussion back at the farmhouse, where Lucas served coffee and homemade biscuits. Richard quietly explained that he'd be communicating with other tribal elders about how best to proceed, whether to request formal recognition of the site under federal guidelines or to engage in a less formal partnership with the university team. In any case, he told Lucas, "You've been a good steward by not disturbing what you found. That's more than many outsiders have done in the past." Amid this cautious optimism, an undercurrent of pressure pulsed from organizations like the North Atlantic Cultural Foundation, whose representative Thomas Winfield had made a brief unwelcome appearance weeks ago. Dr. Morales warned Lucas that such institutions often attempted roundabout tactics, like lobbying local politicians or promising hefty donations to academic departments to gain an upper hand. A rumor spread through Maplewick that Winfield was courting the county commissioner with the promise of building a state-of-the-art cultural center near the highway, a plan that suspiciously included research on artifacts from the Caldwell farm. Meanwhile, Grace Campbell, the town librarian who had first given Lucas helpful documents, grew increasingly alarmed as media chatter persisted. Every few days, she dropped by with fresh clippings or chatter she overheard at the library. "It's heating up," she said one afternoon, worry etched on her face. "I've had 2 different newspaper reporters asking if you're meeting with foreign buyers. It's ridiculous." "But it's out there," Lucas sighed, setting down a crowbar he'd been using to pry off rotten barn planks. He felt the weight of a conflict that was less about land or history and more about power, who controlled the narrative, who claimed ownership, and who benefited financially. As the situation escalated, Dr. Morales' small research team doubled its efforts. Dr. Clark, the metallurgist, spent several days analyzing the medallion's composition under lab conditions. Preliminary results hinted at a complex alloy of copper and tin with trace elements of silver, more advanced metallurgy than one would expect from early colonial settlements. Mina Coalfield, the anthropology grad student, pored over local archives with Irene Gustafson, searching for even the faintest mention of a sacred ring or ancient circle that might appear in diaries, letters, or land deeds. They soon uncovered an 1840s journal entry from a settler named Abraham Caldwell, which described a solemn ring of stones that his family vowed never to disturb as per a verbal agreement with local tribes. The text alluded to a custom of leaving small offerings or tokens in the center, an intriguing echo of the medallion's presence. Though details were sparse, the passage offered a direct link between the Caldwell family and a centuries-old handshake promise. With all these puzzle pieces slowly coalescing, Dr. Morales felt an urgent need for a formal archaeological plan. One evening, she and Lucas sat at his rickety farmhouse table, drafting a document that would outline permissible excavation methods, cultural consultation requirements, and a project timeline. "The key is to get out ahead of bigger institutions," Dr. Morales explained. "If we establish a credible community-backed proposal, it becomes much harder for an outside group to claim they're the real experts and swoop in to strengthen that community backing Lucas and Dr. Morales invited his sheriff, Danny Carroll, Grace Campbell, and Irene from the Historical Society to co-sign the proposal. Each had a vested interest. The sheriff wanted to avoid a media circus and possible trespassing. Grace wanted accurate historical records for Maplewick, and Irene hoped to protect the site's integrity. Moreover, the Lenape representatives had agreed to review the draft and suggest any cultural protocols that might be missing. Word of this plan leaked out into Maplewick's rumor-laden air. Some residents cheered Lucas for taking charge. Others rolled their eyes, grumbling that he was overcomplicating an opportunity to cash in. Ronald Baxter from the hardware store offered a grudging nod of approval. One morning, "I still don't think that land's worth all this fuss," he admitted. "But if you can turn it around, maybe Maplewick will see some good in it." That from the man who had once laughed at Lucas's purchase felt like a milestone in local acceptance. Lucas himself oscillated between pride and wariness. At dusk, he sometimes stood on the patched-up porch, gazing across the fields he'd toiled over, and reminding himself why he came here to find solace, to build something meaningful after years of war. Instead, he found himself at the nexus of a contested heritage. On some nights, the shifting shadows on the farmland made him imagine the presence of those who once lived here long before Maplewick was settled. Ghostly reminders that the land never truly belongs to any one person in a permanent sense. The turning point arrived in the form of a formal letter delivered by a courier from the state capitol. Lucas opened it on his porch, Dr. Morales standing by his side. The letter bore the seal of the Pennsylvania Historical Preservation Bureau, informing Lucas that multiple organizations, unnamed but obvious to guess, had filed preliminary petitions to designate the Caldwell property as a site of national archaeological significance. Ordinarily, such a designation could offer protections against destructive development, which Lucas would welcome, except the letter also hinted that state-appointed experts would have the authority to enter the land to conduct necessary evaluations. Dr. Morales's brow furrowed as she read the text. This is exactly the kind of pressure tactic I expected. They want to push you out of the driver's seat, so to speak. Sinking onto the porch step, Lucas massaged his temples. So if I refuse, do they storm the place with government backing? If I agree, do they basically commandeer the site? She pursed her lips. In practice, it's more nuanced. There would be hearings, negotiations, but yes, it can lead to you losing significant control if they label it a matter of public interest. Granted, they can't just confiscate your property, but they can make your life miserable with legal red tape. Lucas felt a familiar heaviness in his chest. He'd faced bureaucratic stalemates in the army, but that was under orders with a chain of command to rely on. Here he was, a private citizen standing against well-funded entities with legal teams on standby. In response, Dr. Morales suggested a strategic move. Gather all stakeholders who currently support Lucas's approach: the Lenape elders, the County Historical Society, local representatives, and the sheriff, and publicly present the well-structured archaeological proposal they had drafted. By showing local unity and an existing plan for respectful study, they might counter the petitions with a demonstration that Maplewick was managing the site responsibly. We have to win in the court of public opinion before we're dragged into an actual court, she explained. The plan came together like a small-scale military operation. Irene from the Historical Society coordinated with Grace to set up a town meeting at the Maplewick Community Hall. Local newspapers, along with a handful of regional outlets, were invited, as were the Lenape elders and any other indigenous representatives who wished to attend. Sheriff Caro ensured that things stayed orderly, while Dr. Morales and Professor Yazzie prepared slides and displays about the site's potential significance. The evening of the meeting, Lucas dressed in a simple button-down shirt, trying to project calm confidence despite his churning nerves. When he stepped into the community hall, he was surprised by the sizable crowd gathered on folding chairs, faces turned toward the makeshift stage. Even Ronald Baxter was there, arms crossed, and a few farmers who still doubted the land's viability. The front row held the Lenape elder, Richard, and two younger tribal members. Richard caught Lucas's eye and offered a slight nod, which Lucas returned, grateful for their presence. Grace moderated the meeting, starting with a succinct summary of the swirling rumors, talk of treasure, of outside buyouts, of shady deals. She then handed the floor to Dr. Morales, who presented a clear timeline of archaeological progress: the discovery of the medallion, the initial survey, the involvement of Professor Yazzie and the Lenape Nation, and the drafting of a local stewardship plan. Her slides showed photographs of the stone circle in its undisturbed state, as well as close-ups of the medallion. A hush fell over the hall as people craned their necks for a better look at the ancient carvings magnified on a portable projector screen. When Dr. Morales finished, Professor Yazzie spoke. She addressed the cultural dimension, explaining how many indigenous communities had lost countless artifacts to opportunists or well-meaning but misguided institutions. This is a chance to do things differently, she emphasized. By working in partnership with the landowner and the local community, we ensure that any findings aren't whisked away to some distant vault or turned into a carnival attraction. Instead, the significance of this place can be shared respectfully with the rightful voices guiding interpretation. Richard, the Lenape elder, then took the microphone in a low-key manner. He admitted the tribe didn't yet know if the site belonged to their direct ancestors or if they were only one of several tribal groups who used the land in centuries past, but he was clear about wanting a seat at the table. We ask for respect above all. Some knowledge can be shared with the public. Some traditions are sacred. The land can support both if we handle it with care. Afterward, Lucas spoke last, reading from a few notes scribbled on an index card. He explained why he came to Maplewick in the first place. To find a piece of peace, to build a life. I never expected to find anything more than what locals called a lost cause. But now that we know how special this farm might be, I'm not interested in cashing in or giving it over to faceless institutions. I just want to be sure it's treated honorably. He finished by reading a short line from Abraham Caldwell's 1840s journal. We who settle here pledge to hold this circle with gentle hands. His voice cracked slightly at the end. A moment of silence followed, broken by a smattering of applause. It grew louder as Sheriff Carroll stepped forward, endorsing the local stewardship plan. Grace then opened the floor for questions. Dozens of hands shot up. Some asked about the legal steps, others about possible tourism. One or two cynics questioned if Lucas was being naive not to demand top dollar from museums. Lucas responded calmly, reiterating that he wasn't against museums or partnerships, but not at the expense of the site's integrity or the wishes of potential tribal heirs. By the meeting's end, many Maplewick residents seemed convinced that local management of the archaeological project, backed by the tribe and academic experts, was the best way forward. Whether that would sway state officials and the powerful private foundations remained an open question. But at least Maplewick was rallying around one of its own, an outcome that seemed impossible just weeks prior. Over the next few weeks, the momentum from the community meeting rippled outward. Grace's connections ensured that an accurate summary appeared in the Maplewick Gazette, casting the entire situation in a more nuanced human light. Sheriff Carroll followed through on promises of increased patrols to deter trespassers, and a few local volunteers even helped Lucas erect better fencing near the road. Irene from the Historical Society compiled the evening's presentations into a formal report, which Maplewick's mayor, a practical woman named Lila Farnsworth, sent to the county commissioner and the Pennsylvania Historical Preservation Bureau. Simultaneously, the North Atlantic Cultural Foundation appeared to adopt a more cautious stance. Instead of direct intimidation or behind-the-scenes lobbying, Thomas Winfield wrote an open letter to the Gazette praising Lucas for valuing the site's heritage. He even proposed a collaborative alliance to help fund deeper excavations. But Winfield's letter was filled with corporate-sounding buzzwords: strategic synergy, cultural monetization, visitor experience, optimization. Dr. Morales rolled her eyes when she read it. It's a pivot, she said. They see the public turning against them if they act aggressively, so now they want to appear friendly and indispensable. On the farm itself, life didn't stop. Lucas and a few local carpenters finished reinforcing the barn's rafters, patching decades of neglect. In the once barren fields, he tested soil samples and spread compost to prepare for planting in the spring. The sight of rejuvenated land gave him a quiet sense of hope, a reminder that his original dream hadn't been lost in the shuffle. Sometimes he walked the perimeter at dawn, letting the pastel sky and the morning silence restore him before the day's challenges. Dr. Morales and her team continued their careful surveys around the stone circle, abiding by protocols set with Lenape input. She discovered additional curious hints: shallow depressions that might indicate wooden structures once stood nearby, fragments of pottery that could date from the late woodland period. Each find underscored the likelihood that multiple layers of history lay beneath the surface. Professor Yazzie coordinated with tribal historians who had begun to piece together Moangtown oral traditions and place names that might link Maplewick's farmland to older narratives about migration and settlement. A highlight came one crisp afternoon when Richard returned with two more elders who performed a small blessing at the circle. Lucas de Morales and a handful of respectful observers stood quietly. The chanting was gentle, rhythmic, and though Lucas didn't understand the language, he felt the reverence in the air. When the ceremony ended, one of the elders approached Lucas, placing a small leather pouch in his hand. Herbs, she explained with a kind smile, for protection, for intention. Use them if you feel the site is threatened. Lucas could only nod, a lump in his throat, preventing a more eloquent reply. In late autumn, a glimmer of resolution appeared when the Pennsylvania Historical Preservation Bureau announced they would be sending 2 representatives for an on-site review. Despite the tension that came with bureaucratic visits, Dr. Morales declared it a good sign. They're probably responding to Maplewick's push. We get to present our stewardship plan formally, and hopefully they'll be impressed enough to dismiss those outside petitions. The day of the on-site review dawned cold and bright. Lucas waited by his porch as two cars rolled in, one official sedan bearing the Bureau's insignia, the other an unmarked vehicle that turned out to contain a government archaeologist and a legal advisor doctor. Morales introduced herself with steady professionalism, and Professor Yazzie arrived shortly after with Richard and another Lenape representative. A small group of Maplewick locals, including the mayor and Irene from the Historical Society, watched from a respectful distance. The Bureau representatives spent hours inspecting the circle, taking photos and asking detailed questions. Dr. Morales and Professor Yazzie presented their meticulous records, the draft research timeline, and letters of support from the Lenape Nation and Maplewick's officials. Lucas fielded the occasional question about property rights and security measures. Tension hung in the air like an electrical current. Everyone sensed the significance of this moment. A positive endorsement could validate their local approach and keep bigger powers at bay. A negative report might undermine their entire plan. As the sun dipped low, the Bureau officials finally reconvened with the group near the farmhouse. One of them, a stern-faced woman named Miss Delgado, addressed Lucas first. Your community has put forth a strong case for local stewardship with indigenous consultation and academic rigor. From what we've seen and heard, this is indeed a site of high historical importance. Ordinarily, we would recommend a more centralized oversight, but your plan is well designed and has broad local support. That counts for a lot, she paused, scanning the circle of hopeful faces. I can't make final promises without reviewing everything with our board, but I'm inclined to endorse your collaborative approach. We want to see more archaeology done here, but done in the right way, respecting living traditions. That seems to be your shared goal. A sense of relief bloomed in Lucas's chest. Dr. Morales visibly relaxed her shoulders, and Professor Yazzie offered a smile. Richard nodded solemnly, placing a hand on Lucas's shoulder. The mayor standing just behind them exhaled in what seemed like genuine gratitude, as if Maplewick itself had been saved from unwanted intrusion. That evening, the group gathered at the local diner for a low-key celebration, over plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. They spoke of next steps, formal documentation, modest excavation, and eventual public education programs that would share the land's heritage without exploiting it. A corner of Lucas's mind marveled at how far they'd come since the day he first explored the overgrown fields. In the months that followed, Lucas continued repairing and renovating the farmhouse, turning it into a comfortable home. De Morales' crew dug carefully in select areas, unearthing more pottery shards and tool fragments that told a story of human habitation stretching back hundreds, possibly thousands of years. The Lenape elders began to see Maplewick as a bridge to reconnect with cultural practices long overshadowed. And the townspeople, once derisive or doubtful, started to take pride in the idea that something extraordinary lay beneath their rural soil. Standing on his porch at dusk, Lucas often reflected on the journey. He had come seeking a life of quiet purpose, and instead he'd found a calling, much like his days in service, bridging differences, protecting something vulnerable, and guiding a mission that mattered to many people. The Caldwell farm, his farm, had proven to be anything but worthless, not merely for potential farming yields, but for the deeper, timeless story it held. And so, in a place he once considered only a personal refuge, Lucas discovered a broader legacy. The land, in the end, belonged to countless generations past, present, and future. By standing firm and forging alliances built on respect, he ensured that the artifacts didn't vanish into the vaults of impersonal institutions, but remained a living testament to heritage, open to all who approached with the right spirit. In the end, the so-called worthless farm became the most valuable ground of all, not for hidden treasure, but for the powerful sense of purpose and community it restored. The veterans stood victorious not through violence, but through unwavering determination, integrity, and teamwork. Local heroes, fellow veterans, hardworking farmers, proud indigenous elders stood shoulder to shoulder, protecting history and heritage against powerful institutional greed. This extraordinary journey reminds us all of the strength found in unity, honor, and quiet bravery, echoing deeply with the timeless values that built America itself. Thank you for joining us on this incredible story. If it resonated with you, please hit the subscribe button and share your own thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your insights and experiences, because your voice keeps these remarkable American stories alive.